Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, and welcome back to the Great Movie Ride podcast. I
Ooh.
am, sorry, I am of course your host Gaston, joined by my co-host Jerryofdom, who said
Howdy,
hello,
howdy.
and I
Mhm.
keep cutting him off because we're not very well coordinated today.
We're
Um,
great at this.
if you're a returning viewer, thanks for keeping up with us and taking a look at our continued content. If you're new, welcome. We've already reviewed a couple MCU films, so you can go ahead and take a look at those. We did The Eternals and Shang-Chi and Legend of the Ten Rings. But now we're mixing it up. We're not doing a recent film. In fact, we're doing a film that is almost 20 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. Today we'll be looking at Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. Uh,
Yeah.
so, would you like to kick off with your previewing thoughts, Nick?
Well, it had been a while since I'd seen it, but keeping up with meme culture and everything, it still gave me good reminders of the movie. And I went in unsure if it's as good as everybody still says it is, or if it's still good, but not like as everyone says it is.
Hmm.
And I think that was about the only thing I really thought about while walking into this movie. Well, sitting into this movie.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for me, it's much the same. I first saw the movie around 2005, the year after it came out. So obviously, just like Nick, who's also saw the movie long before, we can't give a true initial reaction.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was a kid, little child Gaston was super excited for it because at the time, Spider Man was my favorite superhero. And it has been probably 7 or more years since I saw Spider Man 2, which I had always said is the best Spider Man movie. Um, and I remember that I loved the movie, especially Alfred Molina's Doc Ock. I loved everything about the character. I thought he was super, super cool. And I was very excited to watch it again and see if it held up to what I remembered. So, with that being said, let's transition to the quick plot sum up here. So, light spoilers, although if you haven't seen this movie, it's kind of your fault, but we'll keep to the same format anyway.
Yeah.
So Peter Parker desperately tries to balance his life as a university student and the famous web slinger, throwing his personal life into turmoil. Meanwhile, well-meaning Dr. Otto Octavius attempts to build a device to give the world a renewable source of cheap energy. But through an explosive failure, he is taken over by his robotic arms artificial intelligence and turned to do nefarious deeds to complete his original goal at the cost of the city. Parker must deal with what he wants from his life, the responsibility that comes with power, and his identity being figured out by those closest to him. All in this exciting tale from 2004.
Yep.
Like I said, if you haven't seen the movie, it's your own fault. But we are going to keep the same format. We're
I
going
don't
to,
know why, but Spider-Man 3 sits in my heart in a special place.
well, more
It's
on
so
that
bad,
later.
but I just enjoy it.
It is definitely enjoyable, but I wouldn't say it's good. But
No.
we'll talk more about that later. Maybe, if you want to see it. Or if we decide to do it, I suppose.
I
Uh,
want to see it.
so let's go into our character discussion, and we can't talk about a Spider-Man movie without talking about Spider-Man. This version, of course, being played by the original live-action, well, the original movie live-action Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire, who is a superhero, of course, and a Columbia University physics student and a part-time photographer for the Daily Bugle.
And a pizza worker at the very beginning.
Yep, it's a part-time job.
It's
Um,
pizza time.
he's juggling all these separate lives, and through doing this in the course of the film, it means he briefly gives up his responsibilities as Spider-Man. Well, I know that's kind of a heavier spoiler, but again, if you haven't seen the movie by now,
Yeah.
see the movie. And of course, Spider-Man has the same powers everyone knows he has. The only
Fun.
major difference from contemporary Spider-Man is For some unexplained reason, the webbing shoots out of his wrist instead of being fabricated by Parker as it was in the
I
comics.
I still think that's a cool idea. Because it's like he
I just
gains
think
the
it's
powers of
weird.
a spy. It kind of is like,
Okay, well, further to your point, if he's getting powers, why isn't it shooting out of his anus?
hey!
Just saying.
Because his hand got bit, yeah, Peter.
um,
I was getting confused. I'm like, wait, which Peter am I talking about?
yeah. So Tobey Maguire, um, as I've always said, he is an excellent Peter Parker. And he is a good Spider-Man. He's no longer the best Spider-Man that we've seen, but he is an excellent Peter Parker. To me, he's just always been exactly as I pictured Parker should be.
Yeah.
Um,
He's a nerd.
Especially with the
He's
glasses and
kind of a
everything.
loser.
It's perfect. The big thing that brings him down as Spider-Man is he's not as witty as Spider-Man should be. Because Spider-Man should be doing the quips like we see Tom Holland do effortlessly with like Civil War and Homecoming. While fighting, he's making all these jokes. And there is a few of that in this film, but that's not something that Tobey Maguire brought to Spider-Man at all throughout the trilogy. But at the same time, these movies, this trilogy, is so famous and well known because of Tobey Maguire's performance. Like he is the reason why these are looked back on fondly for the most part.
Bully Maguire.
Bully Maguire.
It's pizza time, Maguire.
Yeah. You got anything you wish to add about Maguire Spider-Man?
Well, you know, it was a good performance, and to add about Tobey Maguire being Peter Parker, like in the comics, Peter Parker's like a more attractive guy in the comics, but Tobey Maguire's not like a oh look at that
Classically
guy,
handsome.
But he gives you that more like, no, I'm not an attractive guy too much, and there, and Tobey Maguire's not like a, oh my goodness, it's Tobey Maguire, look at that. It's like a, hey, it's Tobey Maguire. He looks like another human being.
Yeah.
And it gives that more feeling, and I think that's why his Peter Parker portrayal's the best one.
He's an excellent Parker.
Yeah.
Anything else you wish to say before we move on?
I also like the scene where he's like relearning how to do the things, and he jumps off the building, and then he goes down. He should have died.
Oh, for sure.
Because he grabs onto the thing, and then like, boom, and I'm like, what? And then he walks away like, my back.
Yeah.
My back. I'm like, me.
That's what I kind of like about the early 2000 superhero films is while still being in some ways darker than the present ones, they still had a bit of campiness that made it feel like a comic book movie, like walking away from that, for example.
And the scene when he's delivering the pizza and he gets into the building and he opens and he's
that
like,
is
and all the brooms, and it's just this like awkward long scene, but it's so funny.
Yeah, no score, like, just silence, and it's
you just
beautiful.
Hear the sounds of the things falling. He's like, okay.
Yeah, it's beautifully done.
And then he's like, it's pizza time. And it's
I'm not paying for that. Yeah. So you get to move on to our next character. So let's talk about Mary Jane Watson, portrayed by Kirsten Dunst, an aspiring Broadway actress and a friend of Parker. And Peter has loved her since he was a child, but he gave up on the chance of being with her out of concern for her safety because he is Spider-Man. Still harboring feelings for Peter, Mary Jane begins dating Jonah Jameson and eventually becomes engaged to him. She also has a crush on Spider-Man, who has saved her life numerous times in the past, and is unaware, at least at the start of the film, that the hero and Peter Parker are one and the same.
Doesn't it change at the end of the first one that she doesn't love Spider-Man? It's Peter that she loves.
It's actually still implied in 2, I noticed. There is some subtext that she still has a crush on Spider-Man. Especially in the famous cafe scene where Doc Ock shows up. I feel like because it's something I never connected as a kid, but at the end of the film when she finds out, she says that somehow I always knew it was you, So when she wanted to kiss him, then I think it was he was going to compare the Spider-Man kiss to Parker kiss to
Yeah,
confirm they're the
yeah.
same one. Like there's some subtext there. Like I'm like,
I was kind of guessing that too. I'm like, yeah, because in the scene before that she was in, she kisses her like
upside
soon
down.
to be, yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm like, okay.
yeah,
So I
which
think
is that same
he's in
way with Spider-Man. That's what I'm talking about. Would you like to start with your input on Mary Jane Watson?
you know, as a kid, never really cared about the characters. Like you're like, oh, Spider-Man,
Yeah, you
oh,
don't care
Spider,
about romance.
you know, you get older, you watch, you're like, oh, there's a more important story going on. You know, there's ties to people, there's things, and it was hard to it was hard to watch in a good way because you're like you want things to work out, but it's just like the timing is so horrible for
Mm,
everything and nothing is working out properly. Like Parker calls her and wants to confess and then runs
yeah.
out of time on. You're like,
Mhm.
come on, Mary Jane, just do something. Come on, you know you gotta be smart enough to know that he likes you. It's not.
Mhm. I
But
I agree.
she was a good character. She's like all the love characters in the movies have been different from each other. Like we
Yeah,
look at what they do for Amazing Spider-Man, it was
Gwen Stacy.
Gwen Stacy, and then now it's
Michelle Jones,
technically
kind of a new character altogether.
yeah,
They just took the MJ initial and
yeah,
rolled with it into an interesting character that we'll talk about next time.
yeah. But they've all been different. But this is like the classic
Yeah,
Spider-Man romance that
yeah,
usually happens. So it's interesting to like look back, and this is like the comic accurate relationship, and I think she's portrayed well because she's not meant to be like this outstanding character. It's just supposed to be the love of Peter Parker.
yeah. I feel very much the same way as you with pretty much everything you said, especially as a kid, not caring about her scenes and everything like that. But watching it again, uh, she is a really good actor.
Yeah.
And also, just on a side note, I want to put out she's one of the few child actors who didn't go nuts and made horrible decisions in life. And in case you don't know which film I'm referring to, she was in the original Jumanji back in '95. Yeah.
Oh.
Um,
Yeah, you look at like the 2000s era from 0 to 10, and like every child actor that like starred in those high school movies and all that,
yeah, yeah.
there it is
Well,
now.
Zac Efron's still doing fine, but
Yeah.
Miley Cyrus and Shia LaBeouf.
There's also who was it? She was in Parent Trap. She was in
Lindsay Lohan.
that.
He went nuts for a
She
bit.
just went. She's still nuts.
I thought she had come down now. Maybe she hasn't. I don't know for sure.
I'm pretty sure she is, but that's not the point. It's just like
It's hard to see that happen, but
yeah,
it's nice to see when either some calm down or they just stay on the correct side of the law for longer.
yeah.
Even Justin Bieber had all that trouble in Florida. He was like, what, 2010 is when he got big?
Didn't he egg someone's house? And it
I
was
just
like,
know he was wanted in Florida. That's all I remember. I don't pay much attention to that.
but yeah, like she was one of the few that like didn't fall
Yeah,
apart.
yeah. And she,
It's like Scarlett Johansson. She was a child
yeah,
actor, and now
yeah.
she's
And Kirsten Dunst portrays MJ with her performance that I noticed is so layered. Because she portrays like a kindness and vulnerability to the character without just feeling like a damsel in distress. Even though she is used as such in this film towards the end, she doesn't feel like that's her sole purpose. And I find
yeah.
that interesting. um,
She's not just meant to be one character, and you see that in the first one too.
yeah, yeah,
Because I rewatched the first one this week as well. 'Cause I
yeah.
was
You
like,
mentioned
I'm
that.
gonna just watch all of them. So I've
Yeah.
never actually sat like it's been so long, and I never actually sat through the first one all the way. And
Mm,
I think this for the second one because it's been so long, it feels like it's the first time I sat through the entire thing. So
mm.
I even remember scenes. That train scene's iconic.
Oh yeah, of
So,
course. You good to move on to our next
Yeah.
topic? So let's talk about Harry Osborne, portrayed by James Franco. Oscorp's current CEO and Norman Osborn's son, and Peter Parker's best friend, who holds his alter ego Spider-Man responsible for his father Norman Osborn's death. He is also Mary Jane's ex-boyfriend and still harbors feelings for her. I'll start with this one, and I just want to get this out of the way right away. This is what I know James Franco for. I have never seen one of his stoner comedies that everyone else knows him for. I know him as Harry Osborne. But knowing that the stoner comedies and that Seth Rogen group, that is what he is known for by everyone else, comparing it to Harry Osborne, he portrays the drama very well.
Oh yeah.
Um, like,
As a kid, he was actually my favorite character.
oh really?
Yeah.
Interesting. In my opinion, his performance isn't great, but it is
No.
solid. Like, it's not bad at all. But it's more impressive when you realize what he is known for, what his bread and butter is, and Harry Osborn is pretty much the opposite.
Yeah.
And
There's
that
a
makes it
big
even more impressive.
like there is a few movies that he's in that are very serious, where he plays a more serious role and all that. Like
127
127
hours.
Hours.
Yeah.
I still haven't watched it, but I
I
know
haven't
that's like.
seen it, but I know the true story it's based on. It's like, ooh.
And then isn't he also in the new, like the rebooted version of the Dawn of the Planet of the Apes?
I think he was in the first one.
Yeah, I think he's the one that owned the monkey in the
I
first
think
place.
so. I never saw those movies yet, but I think he was.
But I know that movie was a more serious toned one.
Yeah, for sure.
So he can do it.
Yeah, but it's
But
not what he's known for.
no.
If you got more to say about Osborne and Franco, go for it.
Uh, I really like him in the third one. I find in the first and second, he's a bit hard to deal with. A little bit because he's so like it's Spider-Man's fault, and every time Peter would try to like speak with him, be like, "So where's Spider-Man?" And he wouldn't like be like, "So how are you actually doing, buddy?" Like, because both of them are going through stuff, and
Yeah,
it's not. But he's so focused on Spider-Man all the time, and like, there's the one part where Spider-Man saves him, and he gets all like, "What the heck? Why did he save me?" Blah blah blah.
well,
You're
I
like,
think he's like, this doesn't change anything or something like
yeah,
that.
and it's like, okay.
Yeah,
Like I understand where they're going, but it just feels a bit annoying.
they could have paid more attention to him still being friends with Peter, because like
Yeah,
it is like kind of danced around like his reaction when he finds out, and also telling Doc Ock don't hurt Peter. But they could have spent more time on that. I feel. Like,
because their friendship felt so all over the place in the first two films,
mm,
and in the third one, it like actually shows it because he's lost his mind at the beginning,
mm,
and then he starts to realize things
mm,
after he hits his head, and then that like that's when everything, and he's like he's the one of I think he's one of the best in the third one. I think that's where he shines. But the
mm.
other two, I don't think that's his shining.
Yeah, that's a fair
Point.
assessment. You good?
Yeah,
All right. Let's talk about Doctor Octopus, portrayed by Alfred Molina. He is a scientist working on behalf of Oscorp and Peter Parker's role model and mentor in this film, who goes insane after his failure to create a self sustaining fusion reactor, which also results in the death of his wife, Rosie. Octavius is bonded with his handling equipment for artificially intelligent mechanical arms, or tentacles, which influence his mentality and convince him that he must finish his experiment at all costs. And just before we dive into the performance itself, just want to slide it in there in case you've been living under a rock. Alfred Molina will reprise the role in the MCU Spider-Man No Way Home next week, from when
yeah.
we're recording this. From
Or
when you're,
wait, no, when we're recording this, it's a week. When this
it's
releases,
the
it's
day,
yeah.
which is pretty exciting. Um,
Unless something happens, of course. But
yeah. May I start? I know I started for Osborne, but may I start?
oh, yeah, you can start.
In my opinion, The reason this film is remembered as highly as it is because of Alfred Molina. And holy cow, does it ever hold up to the reputation? In my opinion, Spider Man 2 is the best Spider Man movie, and it all comes down to Doc Ock. This is one of the best comic book performances ever.
It felt like a comic book movie because of it.
Yeah, and he portrays it so well. All the aspects of Otto Octavius, a good Samaritan, corrupted by things out of his control, to his internal struggles, and more that we'll get into when we get into the meat of the story. I had said for years that the MCU could not do Doc Ock unless they bring back Alfred Molina, as no one could do it better, and they are doing it. He is my favorite character in the film by far, and yeah, it's like Wenwu all over again. I could sing his praises all day. What about you?
He was all of his fight scenes and the scenes where he's interacting with people. It feels good, like it feels right, and this is how it should be. When you see those when he's fighting Spider-Man and all that, it feels like it's out of a comic book. You know, it's got those things, and when they're on the train, he's like, "You gotta catch a train," and he's like,
You have a
and then
train
he
to
hops
catch.
away.
Yeah, salute. And well, the other thing is they don't make these movies like this anymore, where they use their surroundings that much. You don't see that anymore, really.
No.
And every Doc Ock Parker scene wasn't shaped by either one's powers. It was shaped by the setting, and it's beautiful.
They start off on a building from the train, and they're fighting, and they're throwing like objects at each other that like they've knocked off each other, and it's just like being propelled around, and it just feels good.
Yeah, it's they don't make it like that anymore, folks. They really don't.
No. They're like, big strong guy, throw other strong guy.
Yeah, and you'll like get great settings. Don't get me wrong in modern superhero films, but how often do you see the fight itself take the shape of the setting?
Yeah.
Like just think about, for example, the final fight in Civil War, Captain America versus Iron Man and the Winter Soldier, all in there. That's not the setting's cool. Like don't get me wrong.
You don't care about that.
And it doesn't shape the fight at all. It's literally just their powers against each other. Having it shaped by the setting is a good choice.
Like, there's not a lot of things in these movies now where you're like, the setting, oh my goodness. It's like, they were there. Mm-hmm. The settings were cool, but it could have been anywhere.
Yeah, you could just like copy and paste it around.
Yeah.
You couldn't move the most iconic sequence, the train sequence, anywhere else.
No.
Like it had
maybe the only one nowadays is maybe when they're on Titan in Infinity War.
That's fair. That is.
But even then,
it's still using just their powers. But that is a fair point. They do quite a lot, especially Thanos and taking down a moon.
But like again, we don't see stuff like this.
And not anymore. No. I could go on for a while, but if you have anything else to say,
no.
All right, then I'm gonna cut myself short. We're gonna try and get this one in shorter than the previous podcast because it is an older film. Let's move on to May Parker, who's portrayed by Rosemary Harris, who, just on a side note, through my own personal research preparing for this, she's still alive, which is pretty impressive. She's like 97, I think it said. She is, of course, Ben Parker's widow and Peter's aunt. And just to get it out of the way, I've always disagreed with Peter's aunt being so much older than Peter. I know it's comic accurate, but still. However, Rosemary Harris is Aunt May, in my opinion. Yeah. You go and talk about it first.
She is my favorite Aunt May.
Okay. Yeah.
Because she gives off that feeling of Aunt May. You know, the one from the MCU, she's hot. That's about what she's got going for. And I think about every guy can agree with this.
Marissa Tomei.
But And then Amazing Spider-Man, they didn't do much with Aunt May. She's kind of there.
Sally Fields, I believe, was the Amazing Spider-Man.
They tried to do more things with the family in the second one, but even
Mm.
then it was like. But yeah, this one, there's so many times when she gives good wisdom, and you don't really see it in the first one. It's the second and third one where you start to see it. And the second one, when they're talking, like there's the part where they're talking during when she's getting ready to move,
Yeah,
and she
yeah.
starts talking to him. Those words hit hard because it made Peter realize what he needs to do, and it changed events because she had that talk. If it wasn't for that, a lot of things would have changed. And even parts where like when Doc Ock took her out of the bank, and she's like, "I'm not letting you do." Bonk.
Yeah, shame on you. Whack.
And it's just like, this is amazing. This is great.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's this old lady who just hit the bad guy of the film and actually did something good.
Oh yeah, saved
Because it's
Parker's
got
life.
right in the eye and everything. You know, like.
She looks so helpless.
Yeah. But she's not.
There's this quiet strength about her that is so endearing, and she strikes me as everyone's grandma. Like,
Yep.
she'll just take care of everybody. She'll just sit you down, take care of you. Yeah, like I from an age perspective, the younger the aunt makes more sense to me, but this is Aunt May. It's Rosemary Harris's performance. Anything you wish to add?
No, but she was good. She was
Yeah.
good.
So let's talk about Rosie Octavius, who's portrayed by Donna Murphy, Otto's wife and assistant, a minor character but an impactful one, as she drives so much of Doc Ock's motivations.
Yep.
Donna Murphy gives a solid performance for her maybe 5 minutes of screen time.
Yeah.
But the thing that I noticed on this rewatch is in that short amount of time, the chemistry she has with Alfred Molina is so legit that it feels like we were robbed of seeing more of that. Almost like Otto and Rosie should have been in the first one, and they just to build up their relationship and then have her die at the start of the second one to trigger Doc Ock. That is their relationship is that good. Like, it's like wow.
Like there. It didn't feel like, oh, like when they're talking about, because Peter's like, oh, there might be someone. They're like, no, there's someone, you know, and they're giving them advice. They felt like the parents Peter could have had.
Yeah, and I think that's the point of Doc Ock's story. Is that's what Peter sees in him. Like, oh, Rosie, I love this boy and all that. Like, and it doesn't even feel like they're acting. It just seems so natural.
And it doesn't really go through your mind too much until after, when you really sit down and think. You're like, they felt like they could have been Peter's parents. That's how it felt.
Yeah.
You know, when you're watching it, you're not thinking that. You're like, he's visiting his idol, you know, because he's very smart and all that. And they didn't really show how smart he was in the first one, and they started getting more into it in the second one.
Yeah, for sure.
And I thought that was a good thing, because I'm like, he is extremely smart. That's Peter Parker. He's a nerd.
That's the point, yeah.
So doing that felt good, and tying it in with them was good. And she was an English, and he was a science.
It's such a cute story too. And
Yeah.
and he's like, I still don't understand what T.S. Eliot was trying to say, and it's cute. Like, it works, and it serves so well to humanize Otto as well.
Yeah. Oh.
You want to root for him, which is something that Spider-Man movies tend to do very well, is make you want to root for the villain. And you like see the path they're going down, and you're like, no, don't do it. But they did. Yeah. It's kind of like Shang-Chi's mom, with the importance of the story compared to screen time, really.
Yeah.
Because without her, there's no further progression to his motives. I don't think he would have, even with the AI, I don't think Otto would have went as far as he did if Rosie was still there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about everyone's favorite grumpy old editor-in-chief, Jonah Jameson, who's of course portrayed by J.K. Simmons.
Who literally is the embodiment of him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you were to ever look at the comics, it looks like J.K. Simmons.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it's spot on. Of course, J. Jonah Jameson is the manager and editor in chief of the Daily Bugle. And why don't you start with Jameson?
I like Jameson. He's like that funny comic relief, yet he's serious.
Yeah, it's like you're laughing at him, but no one around him is laughing, which makes it even funnier as it's
Yeah.
going. Because everyone
Like
else
the
is just like, he's just like this. And we're like, no one can be like that.
and like when Peter was like, "Can you give me like the money like whenever?" And he's like,
You serious?
"Wait, you're serious?"
Yeah, yeah.
And then when he has Spider-Man suit, then he takes it back. He's like, "You,"
He's a menace.
and it just
Downright
it
thief.
feels funny. Like it just feels right. He does it so well.
And that delivery too, like the lightning fast reading of his lines, and it suits the editor of a newspaper so well because that's how you would expect him to talk. It's wonderful.
Yeah. And then the part when they're in the wedding and she runs out and he's like, "Cancel the food."
Yeah, cancel the
I can't remember.
hors d'oeuvres. I think caviar. Cancel the caviar.
Caviar.
That's the one.
And his wife is just like, ah. She looked so confused.
Yeah, yeah. He is another iconic role that should never be recast, just like Alfred Molina. And of course, he wasn't, as we saw in Far From Home. J. Jonah Jameson is still J.K. Simmons in the MCU.
Yeah, as you should be.
And J. Jonah Jameson, he's never on screen for very long,
But
but
he
he
leaves
steals every scene he's in. And it's like the off the walls anger, the always shouting. It's funny, it's entertaining.
I really like it in the third one when he has to take his
The
medication. And then he's like, wrong one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's just like,
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah. And just as I mentioned with the lookalike to the comics, it honestly, Google search it, it is probably the closest likeness we're ever gonna get in comic to film. There's no way it could be that accurate in IRL other than that one. Like, it is insane.
No.
And finally, the last important character to the story, let's talk about Jameson's son, John Jameson. Portrayed by.
We never see.
Well, you do see him multiple times in the film. That's who.
Is that?
That's MJ's fiance.
I didn't realize
You missed that? He's the astronaut. John Jameson is portrayed by Daniel Gillies. He is an astronaut and MJ's fiance. If I may go first, he is the focus of a pointless romantic subplot that is reoccurring throughout the film. Who is a flat character with nothing important to do, and my least favorite character in the film.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that love triangle angle just didn't benefit the story. That's my only complaint. That's my only complaint.
It just felt annoying.
Yeah, it wasn't necessary.
Like I couldn't even remember him when I watched this movie, and I thought when she's talking about her new one, I thought it was Harry, and they were just keeping it a secret.
Well, they do that kind of in the third one that she gets back with Harry. Yeah. But yeah.
Because he turns into Bully McGuire.
Yeah. So before we move on to effects and cinematography, who is your favorite and least favorite of the characters?
I think rewatching it, I think Spider-Man's my Peter Parker. Tobey Maguire. He's my favorite.
Okay.
And least favorite is John Jameson or whatever. Yeah. I could have cared less about it. He was there.
Yeah, everyone else in this movie is doing an excellent job. And it's not the actor's fault that he was given absolutely nothing of importance to do.
There is one thing I do want to add, which I hadn't remembered for a while until I watched these two, like the first one, this one, was seeing Stan Lee was weird. Because it's like, we haven't seen him in any Marvel movie since, what was it?
Endgame was his last one.
Yeah. And we haven't seen him since, and it felt because in the Marvel movies, you can tell he's making his appearance. But in the first and second one, he just makes a little
It's so
in the
brief.
screen and then he's gone, and you could miss it.
Yeah.
But it feels right,
Yeah, to see Stanley.
and it felt nice seeing him again.
Yeah, I feel that. Oh, another thing, just before we move on, the character. Let me make sure I get his name right, so I don't just describe him poorly. Um, hold on. Robbie Robertson, the black guy who works with Jameson at Daily Bugle.
Yeah.
Do you think he knows that Parker is Spider-Man?
He gives off that vibe.
There's a lot of looks between the two, like, I wonder where Spider-Man went, and he's like glaring at Parker. It's kind of, what does he know?
I feel like he kind of figured it out himself.
I think so. Like that's what I feel. Like I could be wrong, but I feel like he knows.
And another thing was I didn't know Rent Guy was in the second one. I forgot about it. Yeah. And then all the parts where he's like, "Where's the rent?" and Peter's like running out of the house.
Yeah. Mr. Oh no, I can't remember his name.
It's a Russian last name. It's really hard.
Mr.
I feel like it's like a Scroffin. I'm gonna.
Mr. Ditkovich. Mr. Ditkovich.
That's what it is.
That's the guy. Rent.
There is, now that we bring them up, his daughter. If Peter and Mary Jane never worked out, I always rooted for them.
Yeah, I agree with that. She was so kind to Peter. All right, let's talk about the effects and cinematography. And in my opinion, shockingly, for a 2004 film, the effects mostly hold up. Especially Doc Ock's arms.
Because they're practical effects.
Almost always.
Oh.
When he's doing the action running, it's kind of hard to do puppeteering for that. And when they're lifting him up, sometimes it is CGI as well. But they look good in every shot, thanks to the mix of practical and CGI.
And I think there's a difference between these movies and like the MCU ones, because everyone makes a big deal of the CGI because it's meant to feel so real. And like and these ones are meant to feel like a comic book movie.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see that old style CGI like it was back then, it doesn't feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, like it's hard.
Like, this feels right.
It's hard to market harshly. Like obviously, the effects aren't as good as what can be done today, but it's hard to market as harshly because at the time that was cutting edge. It's like watching Jurassic Park and seeing how the CGI dinosaurs still hold up.
That Jurassic Park is a different story completely.
Oh yeah, Jurassic Park is kind of impressive. Now there were a couple shots that jumped out as bad to me. The big one I want to talk about is the wide angle shots in the final fight that shows the device in the background when Doc Ock is like walking up to it. Clearly, the device wasn't.
Looks like a green screen.
Yeah, the device wasn't there.
And however, if you also watch the scene when it's sinking into the water and you see him underneath it, he's just kind of like levitating there.
However, when it does that close-up of Doc Ock's face before he goes and grabs the device, that shot looked incredible. But that's because it was just the light and the sun behind him that it was easy to make that look incredible. Yeah. It was like the perfect shot for him. Also, when he picks up Mary Jane in the cafe, that one didn't look great. But when he picked up Aunt May, it looked fine though, which was kind of weird.
I think that one was because it was more focused on like people, and it wasn't like
not a wide angle of New York.
Like even when you watch their fight from the building going down to the train, you can clearly tell everything there is CGI.
Oh, of course.
That scene, I think, was more meant to be like you're supposed to see the actual characters there.
Yeah, and not.
But like when they're climbing up the building, it's CGI. Like you can clearly tell.
Oh yeah.
But like, it's the transitions, because there's times when it's supposed to look like that, and there's parts where it's not, and the parts where it does look like that but it shouldn't, that's when it feels off.
Hmm. But like I said, it's hard to market harshly
Yeah.
because of 2004.
Hmm.
Anything you want to bring up?
No, that like I still feel like Peter Parker swinging looks a little
Mm,
off, but other than that, I'm not gonna complain. It's still a good Spider-Man movie.
yeah.
If we were talk about the first one, there's a big part where I would like to complain, but we're not talking about the first one.
So transitioning to the cinematography, I believe the cinematography was gorgeous.
Yeah.
The shot choice in almost every scene was wow. Nowadays, it feels like they don't pay as much attention to the shot selection in superhero films as this one did.
No.
There was not a time if watching this film where I thought they should have used a different angle or a different take. Not even
No.
once. And I just want to again mention that final shot of Doc Ock looking at Spider-Man with the fusion reactor, that close up on his face. That is a gorgeous shot. Like that choice of having it like that, the man and the monster he created,
Oh yeah.
beautiful. um, take it away. You got anything to add?
I there's really no complaints. Costume design, there's one thing I wish is throw a bra on Mary Jane at the end. That's about all I have to say.
Anyway, writing and score. The writing is decent.
Yeah.
It's not exceptional. There was only a few lines that were really great, but nothing was bad, in my
No.
opinion. The script, though, it really only works as well as it does because the core cast gives such a phenomenal performance.
Yeah.
Like, they elevate some pretty basic lines into something that is memorable and iconic.
Yeah.
My favorite line in the whole film is Doc Ock's final line, but I'll get into that in the heavy spoiler territory. Anything you wish to add about the writing?
But the writing was good. My complaints are kind of how they treated Harry Osborne, but
Mm,
other than that, he still felt human. A lot of characters in this film felt more human,
mm,
because in the first one, it's kind of like it feels like watching all of the Marvel movies. It's a completely different mindset watching these movies.
yeah.
That's what I've noticed, because I'm like expecting it to be like a Marvel movie. I'm like, well, it is a Marvel movie. It's not the same type.
Yeah.
It's completely different. So it's just some things may seem bad, but they're not. They're actually good. It's just the way I view things now differently, and I think it's changed a lot of perspectives on how the writing is in this movie. So
Mm.
I don't think there's a lot of criticizing I can give it.
Yeah, like there's nothing exceptional, but there's nothing bad. It's a decent script.
Yeah.
Um, but now for the first time, we're gonna talk about a score that, in my opinion, was actually really really good. For Eternals of Shang-Chi, I was just kind of like the score did its job. It was fine. But the score in this one was really good. From
You
Doc
know,
Ock's theme to Spider-Man's theme to the action score, it just draws you in.
what scene that I really liked was after Peter accepted that he's not gonna be, it's kind of big spoiler, where he's not gonna be him for a while, and it plays the music and he trips and falls and then he gets back up. But the
Yeah.
whole scene, it just felt happy. The music felt
Oh yeah.
great. It just felt like a great time.
Raindrops are falling on my head, just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed. Actually, I have that in my notes too. Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head by BJ Thomas. The use of that in that scene is inspired and hilarious.
Yeah.
And
See it fall just
yeah,
made me burst out
it
laughing.
was perfect. And there's no doubt that Sam Raimi's direction was phenomenal on all
Yeah.
fronts. The score selection, the shots, it was the cinematography. It was great. Getting those performances from the characters, So let's dive into the heavy spoilers. So warning, warning, we are headed into heavy spoiler territory from a movie that is 17 years old. Buckle up. 2 years after the Green Goblin's death, Peter Parker is estranged from both. That word came out in multiple syllables. Is estranged from both his love interest MJ and his best friend Harry Osborne, and discovers that his Aunt May is facing eviction. He finds himself suffering temporary but recurring losses of his Spider-Man powers, often in life-threatening situations.
I kind of wish they touched on more why his powers were more kind of going on and off.
Yeah,
Because
they
it's
don't
very
give a
at random.
satisfying explanation.
It just kind of like all of a sudden they started working again. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
why? I'm not gonna worry about it, but
Yeah,
it
why?
just felt because like in the bank
Yep.
when they're fighting, he's all of a sudden can't shoot him, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden he's perfectly fine. Nothing happened,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, so why did it happen? Why
Yeah.
are you? That was my one complaint
Um,
for the opening
just
part.
just on a side note, before I keep going with my plot description, do you find that you watch movies differently since we started doing this?
Yep,
Yeah, me too. I'm like
I'm
idolizing
looking at them more
everything.
like judgmentally. I'm like,
Yeah,
I gotta judge everything.
we're becoming reviewers. As long as we
Oh
don't become
shoot.
those guys from Cinema Sins, we're fine. We love you,
They're
Cinema
hard to
Sins.
watch now. I
They
watched the
nitpick
Transformers '86
everything.
one. If you watch the '86 Transformers movie, they just point out things that don't make sense at all. Like this isn't even related to the movie. They're like, there's Death Star 1, there's Death Star 2, calling Unicron Death Star, and they're calling the other planet that he eats in the first scene the Death Star, and I'm like, where are you going with this joke? I had to stop watching because I'm like, this is so hard to watch. There's nothing to criticize, and you're criticizing something that's not even important.
um, so Harry, who is now head of Oscorp's Genetic and Scientific Research Division, is sponsoring a fusion power project by nuclear scientist Otto Octavius, who befriends and mentors Peter. While handling hazardous materials, Octavius wears a harness of powerful robotic tentacle arms with artificial intelligence. During a public demonstration that Peter and Harry attend, a power spike causes the fusion reactor to destabilize. Octavius refuses to shut down the reactor, and when everything goes critical, his wife Rosie is killed. Shocking. In case you can figure out what he was motivated by. And burning the inhibitor chip in the back of his neck that was stopping the arms from accessing his nervous system. Peter, as Spider-Man, shuts the experiment down, destroying it in the process. That is our first chunk. May I just take a moment to say that the thing that surprised me most about rewatching this movie is that it takes 40 minutes for Doc Ock to Doc Ock.
Yep.
That blew me away. I was like, no way that it's 40 minutes in and he still hasn't Doc Ocked. But
The
it's
movie
absolutely
at
true.
the beginning feels slow. I'm gonna be honest.
It does.
Felt slow.
And you know why? Because that stupid John Jameson added plot arc that was pointless.
Yep.
Remove it, you got a much cleaner film. But it takes 40 minutes for the villain to villain. Which is interesting.
And I feel like they don't really emphasize on his villainy as much as it is
What do you mean?
in the movie. Because, like, he is a villain, but he doesn't feel like a full-on villain.
Well, that was the point.
Yeah.
He's not supposed to be. So, the next
They just
chunk.
never explained what he did with the bank money. Because he kind of
Well, yeah,
took and then ran.
he used it to build the device.
Mm.
The events of the movie take place over multiple days, if not weeks.
Mm-hmm.
At a hospital, doctors prepare to surgically remove Octavius's harness and the arms. Without the inhibitor chip, the now sentient arms defend themselves and kill all the doctors. The arms are very evil. Upon regaining consciousness and seeing the carnage, not that carnage, actual destruction, Octavius escapes and takes refuge at a harbor. Becoming increasingly influenced by the arm's AI, he decides to retry his experiment. He robs a bank to fund the second experiment, where Peter and May coincidentally are located. Now, Octavius takes May hostage. Peter rescues her, but Octavius flees with the stolen money. The Daily Bugle subsequently dubs the scientist Dr. Octopus, because Doctor Strange is taken. Little subtle
I like
nod
that
there.
little joke.
Yeah, a little subtle nod there. So obviously that chunk of the film covers the famous bank heist scene. And boy, is that ever a great scene. It's just
Is
so, Sam Raimi.
Sam Raimi still doing the new Doctor Strange movie, or
As
what's
far as I
happening?
know, he's still doing
I
Multiverse of
wonder if
Madness.
they'll do something with those two.
I don't know.
It would be a little funny joke to throw in.
Hmm.
It would. I would be happy about it.
Imagine just something like someone sees Doctor Octopus. Who are you, Doctor Strange? Then Benedict Cumberbatch. No, I'm Doctor Strange. It'd be funny. Um,
Or just have Jonah Jameson interact with
yeah.
Doctor Strange and Doctor Octopus in the same room.
Hmm.
Which one's the real Strange?
Yeah. The one thing that I do want to just do a quick shout out for is Joel McHale, Jeff from Community as the bank teller.
That was hilarious.
Yeah, I'm like, it's Jeff, and playing a very Jeff-like character.
Yeah.
Because
He's
that's
like,
pretty
well,
much all
can't
he
help you,
does.
screw you. And then the steal the bank and there's gold. Oh, okay. Bang!
Gets beat up by Aunt May. So funny. Anything you wish to say about any of that chunk of the film?
Uh, I actually really liked the bank fight and all
Oh, it's
that.
great.
It felt like such a comic book fight.
Oh yeah,
Even in the Spider-Man game for the PS4, there's a part where you fight Shocker in a bank, and it just when I played that like a while ago, and now I got to this, and it felt like I was watching it take place. And I'm like, it was like when I was fighting Shocker in a bank. You know, it gave me that vibe. Like they're using their surroundings. They're throwing packages of money. You're throwing in the game. You're throwing tables. You're throwing desks. You're throwing money at them, and it feels. I just in comic book. It felt great.
What I kind of like about it is in the MCU, when have we ever seen one of their supervillains rob a bank? Because it's such an old fashioned thing for a villain to do, but it's so comic book for a villain to do. Like it's wonderful. And I do want to comment on that scene where the arms kill the doctors. That is straight out of a horror movie. Like, holy cow!
The way they cinematograph, like
The cinematography,
it just
yeah,
they do great. It
it's a
looks.
horror movie.
The part where I was a little confused is when he realizes it and he's like, "No!" and he yells it, and then the arms are also like saddened about what happened. I'm like,
Yeah, that's a little weird.
what?
I do agree with that. That it should have been him just looking shocked, and then the arms just like getting him out of there. That would have been better. But
Yeah.
so in our next chunk, Mary Jane has become engaged to the astronaut John Jameson, the son of Bugle editor J. Jonah Jameson. Peter suffers an emotional breakdown over his inability to balance his life and loses his powers. He quits being Spider-Man and returns to his normal life, and unsuccessfully attempts to reconcile with Mary Jane. Garbage Man brings Peter's costume to Jameson, who takes credit for driving Spider-Man into hiding. Peter tells May the truth behind his Uncle Ben's death and how he is responsible. May forgives him, but the rise in New York City's crime rate worries Peter. So there's our next chunk. Go for it.
That scene with Aunt May and Peter talking, and then she walks away because he puts his hand out on hers and she pulls it and walks away. That like hurt me. I was
stings.
Like, oh, because it usually in movies it'd be like, it's all right.
Yeah.
I forgive. But no, it hit you with a real life feeling because they probably would just.
Oh yeah. It makes it feel so much more real that she walked away. And yeah, she comes around eventually, as most good families would. But yeah, it made it feel real that there was that time in between. Yeah. It was really.
It wasn't immediate. He found out from someone else that the house was getting sold, and then he showed up. Yeah. You know, like it. But that's like one of my favorites. And then thinking J. Jonah Jameson thinking he shut down Spider-Man was also funny because it's like, no, he didn't.
I did it. So, as we head into the third act here, requiring the isotope tritium to fuel his reactor, Octavius visits Harry Osborne to demand it. Harry agrees in exchange for Spider-Man, whom he believes is responsible for Norman's death. He tells Octavius to seek Peter, whom Harry believes is friends with Spider-Man, but tells Octavius not to harm him. Octavius locates Peter and tells him to find Spider-Man and captures Mary Jane. Her endangerment leads Peter's powers to resurrect themselves, because story, and his morale is also restored. As Jameson admits that he was wrong about Spider-Man, Peter, now filled with courage, steals his costume back from the Bugle and goes after Doc Ock, while Jameson then goes back to calling Spider-Man a menace.
That scene when Octavius goes after Peter and he throws that car is like such a cool scene.
I can't believe how well that car effect holds up. It looks like they legitimately threw a car at Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst.
It wasn't until after they're standing there it looks a little weird, but during it
looks
good.
legit. It's like, wow.
It's
impressive. I don't have much else to add, so if you do, go for it.
It was funny with Jonah Jameson and Spider-Man again.
Yeah.
Because he's finally like, maybe he's the hero we really need. And then steals his costume. He's a menace! And it's like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So,
and then I think that little chemistry between Otto and Terry in that scene was interesting.
Yeah, they're definitely not played up as buddy, but no. You feel this, like, the common ground of wanting, like, to help each other to accomplish things, but at the same time the menace that either one could try to kill the other, because Harry's not in a good place right now. Octavius is not in a good place right now. So it's like these two people who kind of...
when he's climbing up his house and then
that
he gets there,
cool.
It's a little bit of a jump scare. That's what I miss from movies now, is you don't have that little jump scare.
Mm-hmm. Not as often anymore, that's true. Although Dune has a few. But so in our next chunk here, we talk about the most iconic sequence. As Peter battles Octavius, they fall onto a New York City train. Octavius sabotages the controls and leaves Peter to save the passengers, which he does, at great physical toll. When he faints from exhaustion, the passengers save him from falling and bring him inside the train, seeing his unmasked face but promising to keep their knowledge hidden. They unsuccessfully try to protect him from Octavius when he returns to capture Peter, whom Octavius delivers to Harry. This scene is so good.
Yeah.
I love everything about this scene.
It's what makes this movie iconic.
Yeah, this scene, the effects, the fight, the people's reactions to seeing his face, even the little quips in there, like when Spider-Man first tries the webs. Or no, sorry, he puts his feet down to try and stop the train, and when he gets bounced back up again, got any other ideas? I love that.
He's like, yeah, I've got a few.
I got a few. And then, if you want to get to him, you have to go through me. And everyone is terrified of the man standing before them, especially the guy who stands in front. He's like, oh my gosh. And then
they actually did it.
I know.
That was the part. And then he just moves it. But I was like, they actually did it. Because most of the time they'd be like, yeah. And then he'd actually start going. And they're like,
no, thank you. Yeah, they stood in front. And then Octavius, he doesn't hurt any of them. He's just like, no. All right. It's great.
And then seeing Peter struggle with all the webs as he's like,
yeah,
you can see the tense fall and everything.
Yeah. And we won't tell nobody. That's so good.
Obviously, in Spider-Man No Way Home, everyone decides to go on Twitter about it.
Yeah. Twitter wasn't a thing back then, or at least not as popular. I doubt it was around. But...
No, it wasn't. It was Facebook. Was Facebook even around back then?
That would have been close to when it was founded, 2004. That would have been pretty close.
Let me check.
Yeah, go for it.
Created. 2004, actually.
Yeah, I thought it was close.
In February 2004.
The movie came out in June, so it would have been filmed before it existed, but...
Yeah.
After giving Octavius the tritium, Harry prepares to kill Spider-Man, only to be shocked when he removes the mask and sees Peter Parker. Peter convinces Harry to direct him to Octavius' lair, as bigger things are at stake. Peter arrives at the Doctor's waterfront laboratory and attempts to rescue Mary Jane discreetly, but Octavius discovers him, and they battle as the nuclear reaction swells and starts to threaten the entire city. Peter ultimately subdues Octavius and reveals his identity, and persuades Octavius to let his dream go for the greater good. Octavius commands the tentacles to obey him, and he sacrifices himself to destroy the experiment. Mary Jane sees Peter's true identity and his feelings for her, which he says is why they cannot be together because he is Spider-Man. Peter returns Mary Jane to John Jameson and leaves. Final encounter.
I need to point out the scene when Peter looks back at Mary Jane and then the thing starts falling and he's just like it felt so odd and I burst out laughing as soon as I saw it. I'm like, that does not feel right at all. He's just like completely calm down. Bah!
Yeah, just so cheesy.
I'm just like, this does not feel right.
You want some
But
nachos with that cheese?
other than that, everything else felt good at the end.
Oh yeah, it came together
That's the scene with Peter and Harry ties into the third one, and
big time.
it just like feels like there is a struggle when they see each other, and it's like there's something gonna happen, and then nothing happens. You're like, oh, expect something that's got me off guard.
And this is where I'll talk about Doc Ock's final line. As he is about to drown the reaction and himself, he says, "I will not die a monster." And if that is not the perfect final line for the character, at least in the context of that film, man, I don't know what is. Chills. Literal chills when with that line, the like expression, the acting. Brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And in our final chunk, meanwhile, Harry is visited by a vision of his father, Norman, in a mirror with a surprise camera from Willem Dafoe, pleading for Harry to avenge his death. Reluctant to hurt Peter and enraged, Harry shatters a mirror, inadvertently revealing the secret lair of the Green Goblin, including all of his equipment. Meanwhile, on her wedding day, Mary Jane abandons John at the altar because he sucked and runs to Peter's apartment. She says that she is willing to take the risk of dating each other, and they kiss. After they kiss, police sirens are heard, and Mary Jane encourages them to go help as Spider-Man. And the movie ends.
This upsets me so much. Is Mary Jane being okay with Peter going, I don't know that I'm doing it, and then the third one.
The contradiction.
I'm just, because I never realized it, because I hadn't really watched the second one. I always watched the third one, so I knew everything. And then I watched this, I'm like, this doesn't add up. What the heck?
There's a reason why the third one is regarded as the worst of the trilogy.
Yeah. But I love that scene where Harry and Norman see each other.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, and then he breaks it, and then everything gets revealed. And I'm like, you don't know what's gonna happen, and then it's on the third one, but it's still like, oi.
Harry Osborne taking the steps down a path.
And you know, I was honestly surprised watching that, and then getting why would you go? Then he was the Green Goblin. Then that's why Spider-Man killed him. Come on.
Yeah, didn't think about it that way at all.
He's like, I killed him anyway. Why the heck?
The fact that Parker didn't kill him, Goblin killed himself.
I still like the final lines of Norman. His final words are, "Don't tell Harry."
I like the but yes, don't tell Harry.
But it's even funnier because he's like, "Don't tell Harry."
Yeah, just
That's the point, though.
Yeah. No post-credit scenes here, but the one thing I did learn from the credits is Kevin Feige was a producer on the movie. I thought that was interesting.
Really?
Yeah. So, favorite, least favorite scene, you go first.
I think favorite scene is pizza time. No. Meme way, it would be the pizza time where he's struggling with the broom.
That is a funny scene.
But I really like the bank.
Yeah.
Rewatching, I really like that bank. But I feel like there's another scene I pointed out that's like, I really like this, but I can't remember it now.
Okay. For me, it's the train fight.
Yeah.
The action,
I
the
really
people
like the
standing
train
up for
fight too,
Spider-Man.
but-
Well, the bank scene is also incredible. Don't get me wrong. pretty much every scene with Doc Ock could have made that list, in my opinion. Least favorite scene.
It's I don't know. What's yours?
The reception for John Jameson. I forgot that scene was even in the movie because it's boring, and its only purpose is to drive that pointless subplot that I've ragged on this entire movie review.
Wait, the reset? Oh, when he proposes to
Yeah,
her?
and Peter's taking pictures, like, just completely unneeded.
Yeah, and Harry's all drunk and trying to fight him
Yeah,
and everything.
that part
Right.
I didn't mind, because that escalates the tension between them.
Yeah.
But everything else is like, just no. Just no.
I don't know. There was a lot of scenes I liked, but there's not one where I was like, I hate this scene. I don't like this scene. There's nothing like I dislike this. No, it's like there was parts where I was like, this is mediocre, nothing special.
Mm.
I don't think there's one where I was like, I dislike this.
All right. For my overall rating, I am giving it the highest rating I have given between the 3 movies we reviewed so far. In my opinion, Spider-Man 2 is still the best Spider-Man film, and I give it a 93%, 4% higher than Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings.
Wow. I'm gonna give it. For me, it's about an 80.
Oh yeah,
It's a good movie, but it's not one where I'm like Spider-Man 2.
I love Spider-Man 2.
I'm not saying I dislike it. I love the movie too, but it's just not one that's like, oh.
I thought I would be the harder marker between the two of us based on our Eternals review.
Yeah. For
Yeah.
this movie, it's because as a kid, I never really saw the first and the second one. It was mostly the third one.
Mm.
That it doesn't sit as like a it's my old. It's like this is a good film, but there's no childhood connected or anything. It's just kind of Spider-Man movie. It's good.
I would just like to point out how Nicholas has grouped all of his shots. Eternals was a 78, Shang-Chi was a 78, and Spider-Man 2 is an 80. That is all 3 of his shots so far. Meanwhile, I'm at 68, 89, and 93. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Great Movie Ride podcast. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in. We did get it in shorter, just over an hour as we're clocking out. Next up, Spider-Man No Way Home, Alfred Molina's return as Doc Ock.
Man.
Woo!
I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Barring any COVID complications, we will be watching that when this video is released. We'll be going that evening. And then 2 weeks after that, you will see our review at the end of the month. So once again, thank you everybody for tuning in. If you haven't checked it out already, we've done 2 other episodes on the Eternals and Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Make sure to check those out. And hope to see you next time. And for the Great Movie Ride podcast, I've been Gaston.
I've been Jerryofdom.
And we'll see you in the movies. Bye-bye.
See ya.